what do you think makes photography so compelling as a medium for raising awareness about our relationship with the environment?
There's nothing more representational than the medium of photography. It's its credibility and its ability to show us something real in the real world. And that right now is unbelievably important.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Baker, founder of Collector Responsibility, here tonight with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with sustainability professionals, academics, government leaders, nonprofits about the work they're doing to understand and solve the challenges they see outside their window, be it in the environment, community, economy, society. And the simple goal is really to inspire and equip the next generation of ambassadors to find their path. So with that, I'm extremely honored to be joined by photographer and artist Chris Jordan, who I've known for a number of years now, since the early 2010s, when his images of dead albatrosses filled with plastic filled the internet. I'm very happy to say that his images still fill my feed and every day still punch me in the chest. And for that, I'm really appreciative of the work. But I really want to talk about how he approaches the work, the projects themselves, and what he hopes to invoke maybe out of those who see the images. So with that, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Rich, it's so good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
As a starting point, it'd be great to have an introduction to yourself and the work that you have been doing, the work that you are doing.
Well, I think of myself as a photographer, or at least I take photographs. And my interest in that medium has always been, it's like we tend to look outward at our world and see all of those problems out there. And to me, all of those problems begin in here. Like our entire culture, everything good and everything bad about human culture all originates in our mind. And that's where I'm interested in, like, making a tweak.
I guess, what was your journey into photography to begin with? Like, were you, a young kid who found a camera and just fell in love? Was it a profession that you came into over time? Like, what was the journey into photography, and what were some of the major steps along the way?
My sweet dad was a photographer. And my mom was a watercolor painter. And so I was just always around both of those influences. And my generous dad got me every kind of camera that came out ever since the very beginning. So I had the little Kodak Instamatic, and then the Polaroid SX70 when it came out. And he just kept me going with different cameras right up until in the middle of college. He got me the most beautiful Nikon SLR, and that just kind of launched me.
And so did you study photography and then go into the field right away, or was there a journey into that as well?
Well, I was afraid of failing, and I spent a good 15 years of my life being afraid to fail as a photographer. So I went to law school and became a lawyer. And I worked for quite a few years as a lawyer in downtown Seattle. And all of the time, all on the weekends and the evenings, I was studying photography and practicing photography and loving it all along. And it took me until I was almost 40 to gain the courage to finally go for it.
When did your interest in the relationship between humans and nature, environment, earth begin?
Well, there was one particular moment that was kind of life-changing for me. Up until this moment, I'd been photographing for like 20 years already, and all of my work was it was just about photography. It was what we call formalism, just taking beautiful photographs just for the sake of a beautiful photograph. I loved doing that work, but I was always dissatisfied because it obviously wasn't relevant to anything. And I couldn't find my way to relevance. And at the time, I was just interested in color. And that led me down into the port of Seattle, photographing like rail cars and rust and giant shipping containers. And the piles of garbage were brightly colored. And it fascinated me because the subject is this horrible pile of waste, but the color, if you only look at the color, it was gorgeous. It's like a Monet painting. And a very good friend of mine, who's an internationally respected humanitarian photographer, Phil Borges, was over at my house one day, and I was teaching him Photoshop. And I had one of those images on the wall. And he said, "Wow, look at that." And it was really sweet. He put his arm around my shoulder and he said, "Chris, I think just by good luck, you finally taken a relevant photograph.
So it wasn't necessarily a story or a focus on the environment. It was really human. It started with the human and where we were culturally, and then from there, what it led to.
Yeah, in that way, I've always cringed a little bit when people refer to me as an environmental photographer, because really what I'm interested in is the culture that goes on in our mind that is what produces all the destruction out there.
And how long was it before you went from, the port of Seattle to Midway Island? Like, how did that come around? And, how did you explore that mindset or that thread?
There's a whole body of work that I call running the numbers. It came in between the pictures of giant piles of garbage and the trip to Midway Island. And that occupied, I don't know, 8 years or something. And what happened was I was cruising around the port of Seattle, taking photographs of giant piles of garbage, thinking that I was confronting our culture of mass consumption. One day I was taking a picture of a giant pile of garbage. I had just set up my camera, and it was like this tidal wave of garbage coming toward the camera. And I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And this is the point I'm trying to make about our mass consumption. And as I'm taking my photograph, this gigantic front-loading bucket machine came around the corner, picked up the entire pile, and went over and dumped it into a rail car. And I asked him, what is that train? And he said, oh, that's the garbage train that leaves Seattle at 5 p.m. every day. And I said, garbage train? He said, yeah, it's a mile long. And he said, that pile you're just taking a picture of, that's some of Wallingford's garbage. And I'm like, oh my God, I wasn't confronting our culture of mass consumption. I was like taking a picture of one drop in a river. That set me to a kind of craving, like, how can I make an image of the whole pile? And of course, this is one of the biggest issues, the biggest challenges in facing our culture of mass consumption is that it's invisible. Like, you can't see all the plastic bottles we use. And I always imagined, like, every time we use a plastic bottle, imagine if we lived in a world where there was a pile of plastic bottles. So it was all the plastic bottles that have ever been used, and you have to go to that pile and throw your bottle onto the pile. And you would walk out there and be like, oh my God, look at the size of that. And you'd simultaneously feel this tremendous overwhelm at the enormity of it. You would also comprehend that that's something that we're all collectively choosing.
We've actually done some ocean cleanups here in Shanghai and around Asia. And I tried to convince one of my clients a few years back that every employee should save every bottle for 30 days at their house and then bring it to the office and then have them talk about each bottle as if it was something important, as a way to realize it was just disposable. It was unnecessary. There's another path.
Yeah, and when we add that up to our collective, our entire culture of people doing that, it's these incomprehensibly massive statistics about the number of plastic bottles we use, or the number of tons of carbon dioxide that are going into the air every day from the burning of fossil fuels. And the intention of that whole project was to confront the enormity of it and experience internally the overwhelm and the rage and to try to face the collective as a single individual. And there was something about that project that I was never satisfied with, because it had a conceptual feeling to it. And what I really craved was a way to face the whole story of our mass consumption in a way that was very personal. And when I learned about this tragedy that's happening on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I was like, oh my God, I have to go there.
The bird becomes the frame, right? And then you kind of peer into that big pile of crap through that frame of the bird. And I'm curious, in a way, like, it makes so much sense that would be your next project, because it is something that's it contains everything that you needed to tell.
And that was a fascinating thing about the experience of going to Midway that was very counterintuitive to me, because for all the years previously, I thought the only way to confront the enormity of our mass consumption is to, like, look at the full scale of it and see hundreds of thousands of cell phones, which is one day of our cell phone consumption. And kneeling over those birds and seeing just a handful of our cigarette lighters and plastic bottle caps and fishing lures and just shards of our junk. It told the whole story. It's like the tip of this massive iceberg poking up into the most innocent and fragile place imaginable, which is inside the stomachs of dead baby birds. Oh,
Well,
I
and I
still
think
feel it as if it was yesterday.
I still remember seeing the first pictures, and as you describe it, like of course that's what it's the exact opposite of the Port of Seattle. It's this Port of Seattle coming through that bird, and that's I think what was so it really did punch people in the face on what that represented. I'd like to back up real quickly and ask, like, how did that project come about? Like, you learned about it, but how did you come about it? And did you have a mission, mindset, vision for the project going into it? Or did you just hear about it, buy a plane ticket, and work it out as you were on the beach looking at what this catastrophe was?
There was a whole group of people who were interested in ocean plastic that all convened at the Google campus. And it was an activist by the name of Manuel Maqueda who brought them all together. And we were talking about the enormity of the Pacific garbage patch, how much plastic is in the ocean, and how spread out it is. And if you could be a wizard and lift it all out and see it, it would just be this unbelievably massive pile of plastic, and yet it's impossible to photograph. And right at that moment, I slapped my knee in frustration and I said, damn, I'm a photographer. I want to photograph the Pacific garbage patch. Anna was sitting right next to me, and she turned to me and she said, Chris, if you want to photograph the Pacific garbage patch, go to Midway Island and look inside the stomachs of dead baby albatrosses. And she opened up her laptop and showed me that there were already several hundred photographs of birds filled with plastic on Midway Island that had already been on the internet for like 8 to 10 years, and no one was paying attention. And I went there, it was such an interesting experience because I knew I was going to take the exact same photographs that had already been taken, or at least face the exact same subjects. I had no idea if I could do anything new or different that would make any difference more than what had already been done.
What was your vision, and is it something that you look back on like, wow, that was a different way of approaching it that actually worked when others it didn't?
There's one principle that it really to me is the heart of photography, and it's something that I have learned multiple times already before Midway. But the biggest one of those moments was my project that I did when I went down and photographed the destruction in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. What motivated me to do that project, and it's the same thing with Midway, is that the photographs that were coming out of Katrina, out of New Orleans, right after Hurricane Katrina, they didn't convey any sense of reverence. It was like this kind of cheesy commercial feeling photojournalism. When I went down there, my only intention was to allow myself to feel something for those subjects. And I trust in the photographic medium, like this is the magic of photography, is if the photographer allows himself to feel something and really connect with that subject, then that sense of reverence comes through in the photograph. And that's the thing that was missing in those photos of the dead birds on Midway, that I just went there to try to see if it's possible to make one that feels different.
How do you approach capturing the images so that you can respect that principle and so you can actually deliver on that emotion that you feel is missing from what others have been doing?
I wanted to take really fine feeling images that when you look at them, it feels like you're looking at a Rembrandt painting, the way just a really well-made photograph just has built into it. It has this rich tonal scale and fine detail and just a sense of more than just a snapshot. So I did that. I spent a crazy amount of money on the highest quality, highest resolution, newest digital camera, medium format studio camera. And then the other thing that felt like I had to do is to control the lighting, because the sun is straight overhead. It's super harsh and just has this harsh sort of feeling. And so I brought a little team to assist, including this really big white diffuser that two people or one person could hold over the whole scene and light it in a really soft and beautiful way. And then I also have this philosophy of centering my subject, but I don't create a composition. I'm not interested in a composition because when you look at a photographic composition, then you're thinking about composition and you're thinking about art and you're thinking about the photographer. What I want to do is make a portrait that's about the subject, where you're not thinking of the photographer. You're just beholding the subject as directly as possible. And I would spend a lot of time looking straight down through the viewfinder and like move the tripod just a half an inch and looking and feeling until finally it felt balanced.
I've watched a few videos on it. In the first rounds, you didn't touch any of the plastic in there. You might just clean up the scene a little bit. Why was that important, and how does that add to the image's emotion or to the authenticity or to your vision? Like, why is it to capture undisturbed as much as possible?
Well, there's this whole kind of conversation that's been going on for a very long time in photography about how it isn't objective. And there's all these ways that photography can be manipulated, including manipulating the subject and either at the time or in Photoshop. And in that context, I wanted to use photography in this project as a documentary medium to show something that's real. And immediately on seeing how much plastic was in some of these birds, it was so shocking to see. And I immediately realized people are going to think I faked it. And so we had to set a set of principles that nobody touches a single piece of plastic inside any of the birds. We don't adjust it, we don't move it. Even if the tripod leg bumps the bird and it jiggles the plastic, then we don't take that photograph because we have to come back with 100% integrity and be able to say that these are straight, unmanipulated photographs of the actual stomach contents of dead baby birds in this place.
What has been the ongoing impact of that project in terms of the discourse of humans, consumption, environmental impact? And what have you learned as a photographer through that process?
It's been really interesting to watch what happened to those photographs and sort of see the whole rise of the ocean plastic pollution conservation movement. And unfortunately, one thing that I have observed that is what I just kind of rage about is the vast majority of all the conversation is about solutions. I was aiming for something quite different. And what turned into my film Albatross, it's not about solutions. I never talk about solutions to ocean plastic in the film. I intentionally avoided the whole subject because to me, the whole conversation, the environmental conversation that is about here's the problem and here's the solution, the sort of Al Gore approach to environmentalism, to me, it's fundamentally broken because it doesn't relate to our internal experience. And the problem with that, the problem with only talking about solutions is that we don't do the solutions because we don't feel anything. We act when we feel something. When we get fed up enough, when we feel our anger, or when we feel our joy and our excitement, like that's when feeling turns into action, and that's the internal part that I'm so interested in, and that was the intention behind my whole film Albatross. But and it's been seen in a way. It sort of took two tracks. Like there's some people who think of Albatross as only being a documentary about ocean plastic, and other people who see it the way I intended, which is as a love story to help us change something inside of ourselves. And that's really like that's the heart of my own philosophy is once something changes inside of ourselves, then everything changes out there.
A lot of the work that I do, and I've talked with people for many years, is what I just call tangibility. The reality is like when you're talking about these big topics that you're covering these big, you're trying to take a picture of the big pile of trash and convert people, you can't because there's no link between you and a pile of trash at the port of Seattle, especially when you're like, oh my God, it's just one train car on a mile long for today. What should I do? But then when you actually frame that in a way like it is one bird, it's a turtle, it is there's these images that definitely capture people and go, wow, I can directly link myself to that. Like that stuff is mine and it's in that bird. I can see how, and it links back to the human, I won't say morality or compass, but it's like there's an emotion that's evoked that becomes tangible. So people will change or are more likely to change.
We may not, a person in one part of the world might not relate to a pile of garbage in the port of Seattle. Like they're disconnected on so many levels from it. If an artist or if a photographer can make an image of that pile of garbage that functions as a symbol, then those symbols are universal. And if it can remind them of sort of kind of the archetypal, like we're all involved in this giant archetypal story of our world, and we all play a role. And that's where meaning gets created. And it's most of it is unconscious, which is exactly why it's so powerful.
So speaking of power, let's go to the light now. You are transitioning from the dark side to the light side. And you say in your bio on your website that you spent a lot of time on the dark side of this challenge, and now you're transitioning more into the looking at beauty as an energy, as a way to heal. So I'm curious, like, what happened? Like, was it you just got too dark for too long, couldn't handle it, I gotta go to a light place, otherwise I'm not gonna be able to capture this effectively? Or did you realize that actually this isn't helpful, let's look for the beauty as a way to bridge? Or like, what was behind this transition to begin with? And maybe then we can talk about some of your projects that reflect that.
During the pandemic, I had the strangely good fortune of being sequestered in a tiny town in Chile on this incredibly gorgeous lake. And I basically spent a year and a half just in contemplation. And one thing that really became clear to me is how broken the environmental conversation has been for a really long time. And specifically, what I mean is the thing that we call doomsday environmentalism, which is talking about how it's a catastrophe, it's a disaster, it's a crisis. And all that does is it instills fear into the public mind. And the leading neuroscientists have discovered that when we're frightened, in the presence of fear in our mind, the amygdala takes over and we literally lose the ability to think. And so that process is a good thing for acute moments of actual danger. But instilling fear into public consciousness activates this process and creates a kind of chronic state of paralysis. And that's what the environmental movement has been doing to the public for decades already. And I think we can see and acknowledge that our psychology has evolved, and it's time to shift the story somehow. For all of the years previously, my own personal approach to environmentalism, and this was built into my film Albatross, is like a scale. And on this side is all the bad news in our world, not only environmental bad news, but social bad news, racism, violence against women, all forms of injustice. All the bad news is on this side. And on this side, we want to live in a state of balance. We don't want to be like depressed, like, oh my God, the bad news is so bad. So on this side, what do we put on this side to balance it out?
I have some similar experiences in that for the first, say, 3, 4, 5 years, you spend time in a really dark place. You see what you want to see in many cases. You'll see every single bad piece of information, and it blocks out your ability. It's like light pollution. You can't see the stars because you're just 16 stories down in a very brightly lit building full of just bad news. But then I started to realize, like, as I traveled, and I travel a lot for, my work, and actually for a number of years I traveled to interview entrepreneurs about the work they're doing. And what I started to realize, like, there's just a lot going on that's really good, and we need to focus on that as much as we focus on the other stuff. So tell me about the current projects. You're focusing on beauty now. You're looking for that as a theme to move the needle, move people, move ideas. What are a couple of your projects, and how are these messages different ultimately than, say, Midway and some of the other work that you've done?
I've started really thinking about the transformative power of beauty. The challenge for me, or at least the biggest challenge, sort of artistically or philosophically, is how do we fully incorporate the miracle of beauty and our experience of the miracle of our world, not only the good things that humans are doing, not only that, but in a bigger picture, the miracle of our world. just the incredible miracle that is every single plant and every single other being and our ecosystems and then the whole cosmos. How do we feel all of that and connect with our love and gratitude for the miracle that we're all part of at the same time as staying laser focused on our problems? And so at the moment, I'm trying to like fill back up the tank of beauty and not paying attention to the bad news so much. And I kind of wish for a more rounded perspective on all of that, because in that space, then we have access to joy and love, which are the most motivating, powerful feelings of all. And we can contain the bad news. It's not overwhelming like this avalanche that's kind of destroying us. We can contain it and with more courage than ever face it and really do the solutions that we know are available.
You start off a mountain of waste in the port of Seattle, and now you're looking at the cosmos. You found the birds to be able to create like a tangible frame that you could capture all that and it came through. My first question is, have you found the vessel that you can shoot, like a baby's face or a turtle's eye or a something that's like, this is the light? I feel like you're a little bit frustrated on the other side of the spectrum right now, out there in the fields trying to get everything. And it's like, there's just too much to capture. Have you found that vessel that you can focus on yet?
There's another kind of theme that I've been exploring lately that feels I'm fascinated by it because just like all my other projects, it came to me. It wasn't an idea that I had. It's something that just happened with my camera. And that is, I've been making very long exposures, looking out over bodies of water. There's something really interesting that happens, especially here. We have just absolutely gnarly winds that come ripping across the mountains and out over the sea, like 60-mile-an-hour winds, and it whips the sea into just a green blue foam. And when I go out photographing in that wind and brace myself in the protection of a building, looking out across the strait as just this unbelievably spectacular storm moves across, all of the movement of the water of 4 hours gets captured in a single frame, and all of the clouds scudding across all get captured in a single frame. And the photo has this feeling of stillness. It's like this silence that lives inside the storm. And there's something about that that feels fundamental to me.
What do you think makes photography so compelling as a medium for raising awareness about our relationship with the environment? Like, what is it about a photograph that can be so compelling where maybe the word isn't?
If you think of all of the possible ways that all of the possible kind of artistic mediums and put them all on a continuum. On this side is mediums that are representational, and on this side, mediums that are abstract. And you slowly work your way toward the representational side, then you get representational painting, photorealistic painting is way over here, and you finally arrive at photography. There is nothing further to the left there. There's nothing more representational than the medium of photography. And in that way, then that's its greatest power, is its ability. It's its credibility and its ability to show us something real in the real world. And that right now is unbelievably important.
Can you think of like a moment where your images have led to, say, a tangible change or sparked a significant conversation, just, either, with someone like Anna, who you really respect and was able to take that forward, or in the wider domain where you're like, hey, one of my images actually has driven some of these environmental groups that previously were going over here to shift a little bit and to get it?
Well, for sure, my Midway photographs of dead baby albatrosses filled with plastic are the ones that have made the biggest difference. And I got messages from people all over the world saying just how horrible those photographs were and how bad it made them feel. And people saying it makes me feel panic and despair. And at the same time, those images played a role, along with the work of a lot of other activists at that particular moment, in inspiring the entire ocean plastic pollution movement and the founding of NGOs all over the world to clean up beaches and change plastic laws and and stuff like that. I was always excited to be a part of that movement.
I think there's a lot of people that are inspired by the work that you're doing, that others are doing in this field. And regardless of the financial incentives of being a photographer in journalism these days, they really find it to be their mission to capture what they're seeing and to tell the story. What advice would you give to aspiring photographers who are interested in using the medium to, document environmental issues, drive sustainability, move the needle so that the next generation is better off than where it is now?
At least for myself, the secret has always been to personally connect with the subject. In doing that, that drives all of the behaviors, spending all my money on the best camera that I can have, even if I don't even own a car, spending an hour taking a photograph instead of just a quick snapshot, and schlep a tripod with me everywhere I go so I can get the highest quality image. Like there are all of these individual behaviors that are driven by that sense of reverence and love for the subject. And as part of that process, there's another piece of it is to go out into the world fully mentally available, or at least as much as possible, to be really present to the subject. And to be able to do that, not only do we have to be present in sort of the obvious way, but we have to be present to our internal processes that would otherwise change the experience. Like looking at a subject, my mind says that would be a cliche if I took a picture of that. Don't take a picture of that. Or that's cheesy. Or instantly looking at a subject, a drop-down menu appears that says that's already been taken by 10,000 other photographers. Don't even bother. And there's all these drop-down menus that once one can become aware of them, then you can hear those voices and say, thank you, but you know what? I'm going to take this picture because I feel something. That's beauty right there.